Hi everybody, fantastic to be here at the top of the tower. As Tom said so brilliantly in that little intro, my talk tonight is all about physical data and glanceable interfaces. And a tiny bit of setup, as Tom said, I'm from a company called Uniform. I work for the R&D team there, and I get to do lots of quite varied projects. But I decided tonight to talk purely about one thing and not really do much setup on the company, but grab me after or have a look at our website if you want to see some other projects. So tonight, I'll mainly be talking about FlipDot, which is a project we ran as a collaboration with the Met Office. And it kind of came about in a quite a long, drawn-out process where we were moving studio, and we really wanted to have a kind of showcase thing in our new office, which summed up our approach to this physical digital way of thinking, and to kind of reflected on some of the connected objects we'd be making. So we decided to basically buy in a display made of these flipping electromagnetic pixels and basically just play with it when it arrived. So we spent a couple of months just writing the protocol which it ran on, and then once we could use it as a normal display, we just started thinking about what else we could do with it, what was next, and what types of data and like interactive elements we could add to it. So this is a little reel. So yeah, that's a little reel of the kind of what came before this next project. And when that was filmed, that's just sitting in our office in Liverpool. And as you could see, we did a bunch of stuff with it. And some of them were user input driven, some of them were more visual and kind of film based. So as part of the London Design Festival last September, we got invited to exhibit in this V&A's Digital Design Weekend. And the theme of the exhibition was all about open collaborative making. And the idea of the exhibition was to kind of bring together different organizations and partners working in an open way to kind of work on new projects. So through a colleague of mine at Uniform, John Rogers, he was in conversation with the Met Office, who were also exhibiting at that event. And their innovation guy, it's probably okay to call him that, open innovation officer, I think, is his kind of job function within the Met Office, is all about kind of using, I guess, emerging technologies and trying to tell the Met Office's stories in different ways. So we said to them, great, let's work on something together. And we had this idea of kind of hacking an existing platform and something we already had worked on. So we talked about a few different project ideas. And we kind of boiled it down to doing something with their incredible data sets and the incredible stories of their organization with FlipDot, which would ultimately end up at the V&A as part of this weekend show. So we decided to kick the project off with a kind of, I guess, semi-hack day. It was a day-long meeting down at the Met Office's HQ in Exeter. And we took a team of people down. We took a graphic designer, a web developer, and myself. And then we got a few of their guys, as many as we could basically, in the room. So we had some developers, some of their more data science people. And then we basically just set it up, showed them some of that stuff that we had at the start of the meeting, and then started to come up with new ideas and new ways of using it to suit their data. And that's what the back of it looks like, because people always ask. And as part of that kind of hack day down there with their guys, we got a bit of a tour of their archives, and they have some incredible old weather objects that date back years, and like some beautiful typography stuff on these old school barometers. And then that kind of historical trail goes right through to the modern day, and the kind of infrastructure they're still using to gather data. So through that meeting, we had various ideas, and I guess the only thing that was decided that we had to do something for the festival. So we went away, we had a bit of a think about what we'd seen that day, the types of thing in the discussions. And then one thing that really struck us that we'd seen in their archives was these giant weather buoys. I think that one was about this big. And they have, I don't know if it's hundreds, but they have about 50 of these things all around the coast of the UK, and they're kind of continually broadcasting data about once an hour, and kind of covers all different things from the height of the sea to the wind speed and air temperature, and it's really sophisticated. But I think when you're watching weather reports on the TV, it's really easy to forget that they can gather that data through these really kind of complex methods. So we kind of went back to them and said, for the simplest execution and what we think would really work well is to kind of visualize that data somehow. We thought there was something really compelling about knowing if the sea around the corner was looking like that or like that. And like this idea of being able to, I guess the other thing that FlipDot does really well is kind of give you that sound and makes you kind of listen for changes in data. So you could be sitting across the room from this type of FlipDot thing, and then you could gauge without even having to look at it what the weather was like. So we started with their XML feed, which is up on their website. They have, I guess, millions of different data points. So we locked in on this one bit of functionality which has various locations. I'm not sure off the top of my head where K2 is from. And then these quite detailed reports every hour on the hour of kind of key things. So from a kind of creative, playful design aspect, we just took that spreadsheet and thought, well, what could we do with this that will make it a bit more meaningful and a bit more engaging? So it was a mixture of kind of like storyboarding out what the experience for the individuals attending would be. And then from a generative or wave point of view, how could we kind of make the kind of low resolution display do interesting things? So we started off with a simple kind of sign example, which looked like a wave tank, looked very scientific, but I guess didn't really show the kind of emotive or bizarre nature of the sea. So then we just started trying to think, well, if that's really flat and too perfect, how can we give that idea of kind of swell within the treatment? And then from there we started playing around with, I guess, contrast mainly. We played around with lots of lines on the display itself, and none of the flowing lines really worked as well because there wasn't big color changes and there wasn't big sound changes. So we ended up with a combination of, I guess, the bottom two. Kind of broke that out and just started to have a think for I think we took 15 locations in the end, and for those locations there was obviously some quite flat seas on different parts of the coast and then some extremely stormy ones. So I guess a mashup between us interpreting the data and then their data scientists kind of leading us along the right path and trying to keep it fairly accurate. So we had to think about if one sea is really stormy and one sea is really flat, how can we show that at a glance and show that in a really intuitive way? So the metrics that we ended up using, and this, I'll go back a step. This visual is more reflective to kind of when you bring in that elliptical pattern, like what actually happens. So we ended up using the period of a wave, which is the length of time it takes to pass a point, the wave height at a given time, and then the wind speed becomes the distortion. And we really like just this simple idea of having, I guess, real-time generative waves that you could glance at and go, that's the sea on the southeast coast, or that's the sea on the southwest coast. So from that point where we knew what the story was, what we were trying to say, and what we wanted the generative waves to do, how could we add meaning to that for visitors? And there's no point in seeing what the sea looks like if you don't know where it's from. So we just came up with a simple reel, and this is very early, where none of the text aligns properly or anything. This is just it sitting on a table when we were still trying to work out what the idea was, really. Something's a bit bad here. And then it kind of shows you where that buoy is located, and then it locks in on a certain location and gives you about a minute of just gradual sea changes. And then from there, it was a kind of challenge of this thing always sits quite high on a wall. How can we both transport that down to London and assemble it kind of semi-quick? And we also like the idea of keeping it at waist height rather than it being up really high, so that like kids and visitors of all different heights could get a good impression of it. And we quite liked it almost like walking next to the sea, so you could kind of like stand right next to this thing and get a feel for how it worked. So that's how the stand ended up at kind of waist height. And this is it as we were setting up at the V&A with a cheeky cameo from Verity, I think, in that shot. And there was this one location called Pap all the way through it where data, it was always like 4.8 meters high waves, and we loved that mixture of the quite flat seas with this one where it was kind of constantly off the top of the display. And we decided not to threshold that out. We decided to keep that in because it was quite comical when it kind of went right past the text side. So this is a bunch of people looking at it, and this person is so thrown by the realistic wave patterns that I noticed when I was going through the photos. She's holding on for dear life. And then I guess the thing to say about the event itself, it was after having that display in the office for I don't know how many months it was at that point, it had just become a part of the furniture. It just kind of sat there and we just forgot what it was all about really, but it was fascinating seeing the public's reaction to it, seeing people kind of come in who'd never really seen that type of technology. I think lots of people, it has a sense of nostalgia because they've seen it or heard it at some point, but it always used to be like so high up that it was completely untouchable. So it was both scary and funny when kids ran up and tried to like touch the dots. We spent quite a lot that weekend putting dots back on. But I'm still really glad we kept it not behind glass because I think it was really important to see it working. I think with mechanical things, you understand them a lot better when you can actually like watch it flip back and forward. So towards the end of that weekend, we just put this film together when we finished it, which I'll play. I'll skip that there because I think you probably get the idea. How am I doing for time?
3 minutes.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'll just flip through this bit pretty quick, but what I thought would be a good thing to talk about when you finish a project is to kind of have a think about what was useful within it. And I guess going back to the start, when we initially left the Met Office after that day's prototyping, we had all these like massively complex ideas that were actually quite hard to explain, and we kept talking about having like a sign next to the flip dot which explained what it did, and like having these kind of like weather, I think at one point like planes flying across it and stuff. And when you're working with that many pixels, I think there's 4,000 in total. It's only 112 by 42, which on a normal screen is like that size. You have to just completely simplify it. You're using black and white. It's like pixel art, which we were discussing earlier. And how can you kind of make that meaningful for someone who just happens to pass by in the V&A? So we tried to keep it as simple as possible, and also use a treatment which kind of is sensitive to the slightly slow frame rate. Like it isn't HD, and we really learned to embrace that through this project. It was also interesting to start with a real business objective at the start of the brief, whereas when we'd been playing with it in the office, it was just technology. It was technology without a real story, I guess, or with less of a purpose, I would say. Whereas when we went in there and understood what they were trying to do in terms of outreach with the public and kind of like visualize data in compelling ways, it made it make a lot more sense. And the third thing I think that came through from this was create by prototyping instead of, we could have done all the storyboarding and stuff flat on screen and not really taken the display down there. But in hindsight, it was a very worthwhile long drive, because getting their engagement at the very start and them kind of becoming part of it and seeing the display in real life helped a lot with the kind of development of the project. And then the final point on that was the collaboration between their team and ours, and also the the team at Uniform, we kind of managed to keep the same people on it from the very start right through to the end. So everyone who started off the project came to the exhibition, and it was really good from an R&D point of view, being able to engage that many people across Uniform as a business. Am I out of time?
Yeah.
Cool. Yes. There's a tiny little mini version at the back, because it's so easy to talk about this stuff and not really get it. So I thought I'd bring one along just to show people. So that is me. Missed it. Thanks for listening.